My name is Dave, one of the instructors from ERS International. Today we're going to continue in our study of rope rescue systems, and in particular today we're going to talk about mainline operations, beginning with taking a look at the Petzl ID, which is our lowering device for most of our operations. We'll talk today about the setup of this, the terminology associated with it, the operation, and we'll finish by incorporating the ID into a raising system to complete our mainline operations. The other half of mainline is the belay setup. In a previous module, you could look back at that and review the operation of the Petzl ASAP. Also in previous modules, we talk about the construction of pulley systems, and you can also refer to that as it relates to the raising portion that we'll cover a little bit later on. So for starters, let's take a look at the Petzl ID. We've been using the ID for a number of years now, and it is our friction device, or our lowering device, if you will. It has a lot of advantages over the brake bar rack that we've been using for a number of years previous to that. The Petzl ID is with the red cover, the red ID, which is what all the plants have, is rated NFPA for general purpose loads or two-person loads. It is an auto stop and anti-panic device, which are two great features that this has over the brake bar rack, again, that we used in years past. By auto stop, what we mean is that the device requires you to actively do something to allow the load to move. If you let go of the handle, the load automatically stops. It doesn't fall to the ground. The anti-panic feature or nomenclature refers to the fact that the handle, as you're operating the handle, when you operate the handle to a certain point, the load begins to move, but if you continue to operate the handle further in that direction, the load then again will stop. So it guards against the operator of the ID inadvertently trying to lower someone too fast or panicking and allowing the load to fall to the ground. So two really important safety features in the Petzl ID. As a bit of orientation and to cover some terminology on this, the red cover represents the front of the ID, and the front cover opens or hinges, if you will, on this rivet pin right here, allowing you access to the inside, to the internal cam, which is where the rope's going to go. And we'll talk about loading the device here in just a couple minutes. With the cover closed, again, you can kind of see the handle, the operating handle, all the way down in what would be the clockwise position, where the handle is pointing down towards 6 o'clock, would be the store and the lock position. And then as the handle rotates counterclockwise and it comes up towards the top, this becomes kind of the beginning of the operating position. One thing to notice is that in the lock position, if we go back to this and open the cover, you'll see that there's a very little gap right in this area here where the rope is going to be placed. And you see that that gap then, it would be pinching or clamping, if you will, the rope, and that's where the brake function comes from in that, or the lock-off function. Then as we bring the handle around more towards that 12 o'clock position where we had it a moment ago, you'll notice that that gap opens up, and that would allow or begin to allow rope movement through the device, which is controlled by the friction in your hand. We'll talk about that in a second. Even at this point, the rope will not move because of the spring tension on this cam device right here. We have to bring the handle further counterclockwise, and at this point we'll meet some resistance in the movement of the handle, and at that point we'll force the handle just slightly more to try to find that little sweet spot, which is going to allow the rope to move around this cam device in here. Okay? The panic position is all the way counterclockwise, and when I yank it down to this position, the load is going to stop again, and this is going to lock off and not allow rope to move through there. Okay? Now that doesn't demonstrate fully without the rope in here because it needs the tension on the rope to spring this cam, but you'll see it in operation as we look a little closer at that. So the red represents the front. On the front, and you'll see by the little inset graphic here that there is a diagram on the front cover that shows you how to load the rope into the device, so it gives you a little direction there. Similarly, on the inside, as you see in the other picture, there are two graphics, one down here to indicate the end of the rope, and another up here at the top that shows your hand gripping the rope, and that also guides you on how to rig the rope through the device correctly. It is important that you rig the rope correctly through this because the ID is a directional device. If you rig it backwards, there is a possibility that the load can slip or fall. So it's critically important that the device be rigged correctly. That's why we point out that there are two graphics that you can refer to, one on the front cover and then the two individual graphics, if you will, making up one on the inside. So you want to make sure that you're using those, and also pay attention to the direction that we'll provide here in just a moment on how to properly rig the rope through the device. This is the attachment hole down here at the bottom. This is where the carabiner is going to be placed that will attach to our anchor. And then this small piece right in here, this little toothed cam right here at the bottom, is the anti-rigging cam. This is a safety device included in the ID to help prevent you from having a problem, a failure if you will, if you do inadvertently rig the rope backwards. It's important to understand also that this is not a fail-safe. This may catch the inadvertent rigging of the device backwards, but it's not a guarantee. So we don't want to rely on this to guard against rigging it backwards. We want to follow the graphic, we want to follow the instructions that we're going to provide. Depending on how old your ID is, there's one other component that you may look at, and there is a gray button on the end of the operating handle. Older IDs don't have this gray button, so the newer ones will have that. Regardless, it's not a thing of concern for us. We won't use this button in our operations. This primarily gets used in scenarios where we have very light loads, such as we might see in some situations where a load is being brought down a slope rather than a straight vertical or high angle setting, and where the friction in the ID is too much for that. And this helps defeat a little bit of that friction. But again, doesn't really have any application for us in our real high angle environment. So that's a little bit of orientation to the thing. There are some inspection points that we want to be aware of before we get going. So prior to using your ID, realize that there are some internal components that we don't have the ability to inspect simply by opening the cover and looking it over. So one of the things that we can one of the ways we can kind of assess that a little bit is simply to give the ID a little bit of a shake or perform a bit of a rattle test. What I'm really just listening for are their internal parts that might have broken off and might be flopping around in there. Then I'm simply going to look at the overall condition of the ID. Is the plate, particularly the red plate on the outside, is it in good condition? Does it appear to be bent, or does it have nicks or gouges in it that might damage our rope? Check the condition and the integrity of that hinge pin that I pointed out earlier to make sure that it is in place. There's also a small mushroom cap, a little post right here. I want to make sure that that post comes on the outside of the plate, and it helps to keep the plate from springing open. It serves as a stopper for that. When I open up the cover, I want to look inside at the parts, and I want to make sure with the handle in the unlock position that this spring cam does have spring tension on it and that it will snap back. And the same thing holds true for the anti-rigging cam. Does it snap and does it move freely? I can look at the overall cleanliness of the device to make sure there's not a bunch of dirt and gunk inside, and I can clean that out a little bit with a little bit of a cloth or even some cases maybe a Q-tip to get in there and get some of that dirt out of there. And then the thing that's a little bit tricky to look for, and I'll show you where it is, but you'll want to again refer to the picture, the inset in the video here, on how to inspect it for wear. In essence, we have this groove or this trough, if you will, that the rope runs through. To my left, there's a small raised portion of metal there, and that is the wear indicator. Basically what you're looking for is the trough, or is that little groove, has it widened itself out? In other words, if it looks something like this now, has it widened out to this point, to the point where that has widened out to that little wear indicator? If the device shows wear to the point where the trough is out to that wear indicator, that is your indication that it's time to retire the device. It's been worn sufficiently that it should be retired. The issue that you'll have at that point is a tendency for the rope to want to slip through the ID, even in the lock position. Okay? So this is a piece of stainless steel, so it is going to wear pretty slowly. It's not something that's going to get worn out in a short period of time as a general rule, but it is something you want to be aware of. Okay? So that completes our little tour of the Petzl ID. We'll move over to our anchor point, and we'll take a look at how to rig the rope up and then how to operate the device, and take a little bit closer look at some of the internal features and how the device works. All right, we're going to take a look at how to rig the Petzl ID. So as a point of reference, this block of steel here is going to represent our load today, and then it is attached to the red rope, which is our main line, runs up through the high directional pulley, in this case attached to the structural steel in the overhead, and then the red rope runs back towards our anchor point where we're going to be running our lowering operation. This lower will be run through here, through our ID, as we've talked about, and we want to talk about how to correctly rig the ID to make sure we don't have it backwards. So we have a point of reference here. We have our main line, again the red rope, and it's attached to our load right down at the other end, which you saw. To start the operation, I would suggest that you develop a routine or a habitual way that you rig this thing so that it's always done the same way. You're much less likely to miss something or to make an error if you're always doing something the same way. So for starters, I'm going to hold the ID in my left hand upright. In other words, the writing, the printing on the front is upright. And I hold it in my left hand, and I'm going to open or bring the operating handle up to the 12 o'clock position. At that point, I can open the cover, and that'll give me access to the inside of it so that I can install the rope. Now I'll hold it here just slightly sideways so that you can see it, but here's the way that I've always done this, and it seems to be working out pretty well. I have the ID in my left hand, I have the rope in my right hand, almost as if I'm shaking hands with the person on the end of the rope. I simply take my palm and I put it palm down to my other hand, which is palm up, and place the rope through the device in this fashion. Notice that if you do it exactly this way, the rope that's attached to the load is also in line with the handle. The handle is pointing at the load, the rope is pointing at the load. My handshake was pointing at the load. If you try to do it the other way, if I hold this here and I shake hands this way and I thread the rope through backwards, this is the backwards way to do it. Notice that even though the rope is still pointing at the load, the rope is still pointing at the load, it's above the handle. It doesn't run parallel, if you will, along the path of the handle. That's not the rope that attaches to the load. The rope that attaches to the load runs parallel alongside the handle. The other clue for you to watch for when I do it correctly, again, I'll start over. Cover's open, handle pointing at the load, mine pointing at the load. I lay those two together. Notice that the tensioned portion of the rope, the part of the rope that will have weight on it, the first thing it sees is this tooth. That's the first part of the device that it runs past. Even though it doesn't contact the tooth, that's the first part it sees. And then the slack portion of the rope comes out of the top. If you remember back to that graphic, there was a picture of your hand right here, and there was a picture showing the end of the rope right here. That end of the rope is attached to our load. So that helps you keep this oriented a little bit. Again, we're referring to the drawings. When I close the cover and I look at the drawing or the engraving on the front cover, again, I'll see the end of the rope down here coming out, attached to my load, and I'll see my hand, a graphic of my hand, up here holding the rope like this. So I should be able to double check my work, cover open or cover closed. I have a point of reference. So combined with the fact that I have a routine or a normal way that I always put this together, the chances of us rigging this thing backwards should be pretty low. Of course, our final safeguard in that is always going to be to have someone double check it. So if I build the system, someone else will come over and verify that I built it correctly, and that would include the things like, did I build the anchor correctly? Are the carabiners locked and oriented, and so forth? So that's how we get the thing rigged up. Again, we'll use the attachment hole to connect to our anchor point. We'll run a carabiner through that. Make sure that the carabiner is locked. And remember that we just back those off just a little bit as we start that operation. And that's what this is going to look like. We're going to add one more carabiner into this in a minute, but we'll, for a moment, we'll just talk about some of the other features of the ID that I think you're going to find really useful, especially if the only device you've used in the past is a brake bar rack. There's definitely some nice features to the ID. So let's take a look at those a moment. All right, we have the ID rigged and attached to our anchor point. I want to demonstrate a couple of the other very nice features associated with the ID, and that is the ability to move rope through the device and adjust how much slack or tension there is in the system prior to it being loaded, prior to the rescuer or the victim getting on rope. So if we have a scenario where our rescuer or victim, in the case, as the case may be, does not have enough slack in this rope to get to the edge, all we need to simply do is turn the device 90 degrees to the line of the rope, or sideways if you will, and as long as there's no drag on this side, I can just simply pull rope through here and give him as much rope as he needs to get to the edge. It's probably important to note, or interesting to note, that at any point in time here, if I would let go of the device, for example, he was to stumble and fall, as it yanks the device out of my hand, the device locks back up again. It auto locks, remember that feature. The device also allows us to take rope in. If he has too much slack and I need to pull the rope tighter, I can do the same similar thing just by pulling the rope the other way. I don't have to hold on to the device in this case. I simply come up and pull rope straight out of the top of the device, and I can take up that slack as well. When you're doing that, do be careful to not let the rope slack into where it may contact that toothed cam, because what that toothed cam will do is grab the rope and may prevent it from pulling back. So simply just holding a little bit of tension here, as in my case in the right hand while I'm pulling with the left, will help make sure that that doesn't get in place and I can pull that rope through. Again, if I have too much rope, it's too tight, he needs slack, turn it sideways and I can pull rope out, just as simple as that. While we're talking about the toothed cam, I'll take just a half a second to demonstrate what goes on when the device is rigged backwards, and you'll kind of see what you're working against. So again, I'm going to rig it backwards this time. This is not the correct way to do it. Notice that the rope comes in and the first thing it sees is this, the top of the device. It doesn't see that toothed cam first, so we know that it's backwards. I close the cover and attach this back to our anchor point. When I pull on the rope that is attached to my load, it's not supposed to go through. It's auto stop, but notice that the rope goes through. Our protection for that having rigged it incorrectly is the fact that this rope comes out of here, and if it were to trail across and catch that cam, it draws that up there and pinches the rope shut. And now it prevents the rope from going through. But as I mentioned in the opening, this is not a guarantee. It only works if the rope gets dragged down into that cam, as it would when you're normally operating it by dragging the rope across here. So don't rely again on that cam, that anti-rigging cam, to keep the thing from being rigged incorrectly. Always load it using the proper procedure and follow the graphics that are on there. Perform your safety checks by having another person take a look at it. All right, that's all the setup, that's all the features of the ID. Let's take a look at the operation of the ID, and let's lower our load down to the ground. All right, let's talk about the actual operation of the device. We have our rope rigged into it. For our little demonstration, we have our weight hanging over the edge, so we see our rope is under tension. You'll notice that with hands off, even though the handle is not in the lock position, the load doesn't go anyplace. If I wanted to lock the device, I just bring the handle down to the lock position. I don't force it. That's all I need to do to lock it. If I'm going to just temporarily, move over and do make some other adjustment to my system, that's fine. If I'm going to walk away from this device and I want to secure it, I'm going to tie that off, and we'll demonstrate how to do that here in just a minute. So I'm ready to do my lowering operation. The ID is a two-handed operation. It takes both hands to run it. One hand holds onto the free end of the rope that goes back into our bag. The other hand operates the handle. As I mentioned earlier, when we reach a certain point, we're going to have tension or resistance in the handle. Just past this point is when the load will start to move. As I pull the handle just a little bit, you'll see the rope start to creep through the ID and move. So while one hand is operating the handle, the other hand is holding on to the free end of the rope. I'm bringing it across this rolled edge on the ID, and I'm getting friction there, friction through the device, and I'm using the grip strength in my hand to make some fine tuning to that movement. Sometimes little things like just arm position will help you smooth out the operation of this. So you may be able to hold the handle more like this, keeping your elbow into your body and get a little better control of this than you might if you're hanging on this and kind of trying to drag back on it. So it's a little bit of personal preference there. So I hold tension here, I operate the handle until the load starts to move. And I can move it, I can open the handle a little further and it will go faster. I can lighten up my grip and let it go a little faster. At any point if I let go of the rope, the load just stops. Similarly, if I'm lowering and I yank on the handle, the load stops again as well. So that's the anti-panic function. To reset this after an anti-panic stop, I have to bring the handle back up clockwise until I hear it click. There's the click, and now I can go back to my operation again. Okay? Now, one other important thing to include in this is a second carabiner for additional friction. This is a good idea to always include a second carabiner in this. Petzl says that you must use the second carabiner for heavier loads. So the rope just comes through just as it did before where I was holding it in my hand, but it clips through a second carabiner, and then my hand friction is out here while my operating handle is like this. So this extra bend, if you will, in the rope and this extra friction here helps account for heavier loads. In order to clean that up a little bit, we've included a rigging plate here, and we like to see the teams, as a general rule, incorporate the rigging plate right from the start. So I have an anchor attachment, a carabiner to connect the rigging plate to our anchor, and then it gives me, even with these small rigging plates, I have 3 openings or 3 holes that I can use, one for the ID, one for the carabiner for the extra friction. Remember, this should be 2 separate carabiners here. And then it gives me a 3rd hole, and this is the hole we're going to use for our raising operation, our pulley system. We'll hook that in there. So it provides us with the ability to do a little bit of housekeeping and keep things a little bit organized. So this is kind of the default setup, if you will, that you should be using in your system. Can you get by without the rigging plate? You can. It just gets a little bit messy, especially as I start to incorporate the raising system. Okay? So let's take a look at a little raising operation, or excuse me, a lowering operation, and we'll watch the whole thing go from start to finish. All right, we also said a minute ago that we wanted to make sure we knew how to lock off the device. For a short-term lock off, all I need to do is bring the handle down into the lock position, and I can make an adjustment back here or some other activity. But if I want to leave the device unattended, I'm going to walk away from it. I would like to secure it more definitively, and so we're going to tie it off. And so the way that we're going to tie this off is with our rope clipped through our extra carabiner here, handle in the lock position. I'll just pull up a bight of rope, a little extra rope from the bag, and I've just come back up towards the load direction, and I'm simply going to tie an overhand on a bight around our working rope, our tension rope. So this serves then to lock the device off in case there would be any slip or creep in the device. The other thing that this does is it serves almost as a lockout, tagout type indicator. Anybody that comes up to this now sees that the device is tied off, and they should recognize that this shouldn't be played with. Somebody is either hanging on this rope or may very shortly be hanging on it, and they're not expecting it to move. And so that serves as a visual indicator as well as a mechanical stop, if you will, in keeping the load from moving. So that's our standard tie off. If you want to go back to the operation, I just simply undo that overhand, and I'm ready to go back to lowering. Simple as that. All right, we said we wanted to take a look at the raising operation part of this. How do we turn our lowering system, something that controls descent, into a system that we can use to raise the load? The typical way that we do this 99% of the time is we use what we refer to as a ganged on pulley system. We're going to take another pulley system, such as the pre-built pulley system we have here in the form of the Aztec kit, and we're going to attach it to our main line, the red rope. This is where we're going to incorporate the additional hole on our rigging plate as an attachment point for our main line. We have to incorporate a rope grab of some sort on the red rope with which to attach our pulley system to. You have 2 options. We can look at either using a Prusik loop, or we can use the hard rope grab in the form of the Petzl rescue sender. Either one works for this application. So if I can install the prusik on here. It's the typical 3-wrap prusik. I can put that on. The new stone loop or bound loop prusiks make that go on pretty quickly, so I can do that. Or I could use the hard rope grab again. I simply pull the safety pin loose, remove the main pin, put the rope into the shell, making sure that the cable isn't caught in there, and then reinstall the main pin by lining up the holes and making sure the safety catch is in place. Remember that one of the big differences between the prusik and the rope grab, the rescue sender, is the rescue sender is a directional device. If I put it on backwards, it's not going to do the job for me. So when I put it on, there's an arrow on the end of it, and that points, again, at the thing that I'm trying to pull up. Not the direction I'm trying to pull, it points at the thing that I'm pulling on. The prusik works either direction. So you have your preference, you have your choice, you can do it either way. Either one is fine. For our demonstration today, we'll use the rescue sender and set the prusik aside. So I have my attachment point. I have a place for me to anchor my pulley system. The Aztec kits that the teams have, while it may not look like this, you have a different version of it, is a great tool for this because it allows us to make up to 8 or 10 foot pulls before we have to do a reset. Keep in mind, if you think back to our system design presentations that we do in our programs, I want to have, as a matter of designing the system, 10 to 15 feet of space where I can do this raising operation. So I simply clip the pulley system in, one to the anchor, lock the carabiner, and then on the upper end, make the attachment to the rope grab. Then I can stretch the pulley system out within the limits of the workspace that I have. The extra rope will typically just deploy, or the cord rather, will just deploy right out of the bag that the Aztec kit comes in, and we can stretch this out to wherever we want to go. Then we're ready to go up. So we'll get our haul team in here, and they can start pulling on the rope, and I'll show you how we're going to operate this system in concert with the Petzl ID. All right, we're all set up to do a raising operation. Our pulley system's in place. We have our ID still in place. Our load right now is on the ID, and we have our extra carabiner here for our friction that we use during our lowering operation. To start our raising operation then, one of the things that will be helpful is for you to get rid of the extra carabiner. It'll make progress capturing a little easier, and you'll see what I mean here in just a moment. So I've removed that extra carabiner. I don't need the friction right now because I'm coming up, not lowering down. As the haul team gets ready to haul, we're going to develop slack in our red rope, as you'll see during the operation, and I'm going to progress capture that slack by pulling rope through the ID in exactly the same way we did earlier when we demonstrated how we move rope through here. Okay? So main line ready for up rope. The load comes up, and you'll notice, again, the ID goes slack. This red rope's getting slack because the tension or the weight is now on the pulley system. As they continue to raise then, what I'll do to account for that is simply pull rope through the ID, just like we did in our earlier demonstration. So as the load continues to come up, at some point we're going to run out of travel distance. If we're coming a long distance, I'm going to run out of travel distance, and the two pulleys are going to bang into each other. So for our demonstration, let's get to the point where we're saying the other pulleys are right here. We call for stop, stop. I've taken up the progress here. The haul team now can go slack on their line, and the load now transfers back to the ID. Now it's just a fairly simple matter for us to reset our pulley system. I can pull this back out. We can get another bite at the system, as it were, and we can repeat this again. Up rope. The person running the ID can simply take up the slack as we go. Stop. And we could do this as many times as necessary to raise the load up to the height that we need. We're doing it in just short little bites, 10, maybe 12-foot bites in the case of using the Aztec kit, which is a perfect tool for this. As we mentioned in previous programs, most of our raising operations are fairly short, and so this type of a setup here is very convenient. It fits well into the industrial setting. That's how we operate our raising system. And just to kind of close the loop on the whole process, if for some reason we did need to go back to a lowering system, We just allow the pulley system to go slack. We can unclip it to remove it out of the way. We could take off the other end, and then to go back to lowering, I just re-engage our extra friction carabiner, and we're ready to go back into lower. We're back to the same situation. So at no time do we lose control of the load. It's under tension, our anchor's under tension the whole time, and we can switch back and forth from up to down as the needs of the incident call for. All right, that concludes our little presentation on lowering systems and the incorporation of a raising system. Now's the time for you guys to get together with your team, head on out into the plant and practice some of this. Remember, as you're practicing this, if you're going to use live loads, you'll of course want to incorporate your belay system as a second point of contact for your rescuer. Again, refer back to the belay presentation if you need a little more information on that using the Petzl ASAP. When you're getting out there, again, during your live operations, make sure that you are doing your safety checks, double checking your systems, and get your hands on this stuff and practice, practice, practice. The only way you're going to get good with this is to get out there and do it. So good luck, work safely, and I'll see you at the next one. Till then, take care.